Every competitor in Smash Ultimate has one player that they just don't want to see in their bracket path. Whether that be from a skewed character matchup, a skewed player matchup, or they're just really good against you or your character, everyone's got that one player that makes them feel dread like no other. And even Smash's top competitors are no exception. Even MkLeo, widely regarded as the greatest Smash Ultimate player to ever do it, has certain people he doesn't want to meet in tournament. Even Superman has a kryptonite. But, and hear me out here, what if he didn't? Hey, real quick before we begin, I just want to give a quick update. I'm live on my Twitch channel streaming Smash every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. I used to also multi-stream on this YouTube channel, but I learned recently from Hungrybox that doing that actively hurts the algorithm of my actual uploads. That's something I absolutely have to avoid, so for the foreseeable future, I'm only going to be streaming on my Twitch channel. You can find the link to it in the description. It's just twitch.tv/ristermice. With that, let's go ahead and get into the video. MkLeo is one of Smash Ultimate's most celebrated competitors, but even he has demons. Demons who have caused him pain in his brackets for as long as the game's been out. That is, however, until a unique opportunity arose, giving MkLeo the chance to finally score one over on his two toughest opponents. Today we'll be going over who these opponents are and MkLeo's history with them before finally going into their most recent encounters, in which Leo was bringing something new to the table, something that had maybe let him overcome these demons for the first time. And we'll be going over these events in chronological order, meaning that there's no place to begin but the start. Our story begins in spring of 2019 at 2GG Prime Saga Kickoff. Now, this tournament wasn't even the main event of the weekend. It was actually a pre-local for the super major 2GG Prime Saga. MkLeo, as the most dominant player of the era, was entering into the tournament as the first seed, and he'd make it to winners finals pretty easily, having a close call game 3 in pools, but otherwise not dropping a game, defeating Falco main Isman and Gluttony in top 24 in order to make winners finals. But meeting Leo here was not the second seed Zachary. Instead, it was the third seed who had just upset Zachary the round prior in winners semis. The first of MkLeo's two biggest demons. A bastion of representation for solo Olimar, and one of the best players in Japan, if not the best at the time, Shuton. And this was the first time that these two players would ever fight. Now, importantly, this tournament took place on April 12th, 2019. Joker would be released only 5 days later on April 17th. So Leo didn't have access to who would eventually become his most iconic character. Most of his tournament run thus far had been with Wolf, but this set opened up with Marth, as swordies are typically seen to have a favorable matchup into Olimar. And the set started off relatively even, a good tipper F smash at ledge evening up a bad percent deficit cleanly. But pre-patch Olimar was a much different beast than what we're used to today, as Shuton put 95% onto MkLeo in the blink of an eye, finding the stock with a blue Pikmin up throw mere moments later. This time, there'd be no tipper in the world that could salvage this game 1, which solidly went to Shuton. Game 2 started off a whole lot better for Leo, getting up into an early lead, but a whiffed up B allowed Shuton to get an opening to take the stock before Leo could. Shuton was doing an amazing job at playing around Leo's range, both keeping him out with his zoning game and also outplaying him with footsies, baiting out committal moves that Shuton found punishes on. And if a 3-1 stock lead wasn't bad enough, yeah, Shuton really had that game in the bag. After that savage showing, MkLeo would swap off of Marth and on to Wolf, a common choice against Olimar players in the earlier days of Ultimate, with players like Tweak and Zachary using him to great effect against the top Olimars, Shuton included, back in 2019. But in this critical game 3, Shuton was able to get Leo on the ledge, catching his recovery with an electric Pikmin down air, and then sniping him off stage with a purple Pikmin toss, once again taking the first stock after having gone down in percentages. And if just one offstage snipe wasn't good enough for you, how about one more? Now, MkLeo was not going to give up, and would impressively bring the game back to an even stock scenario, utilizing Wolf's pre-patch down smash to great effect. But ultimately, the game would end through, I'll give you 3 guesses and the first 2 don't count. Yeah, that's right, another purple snipe. And that's how the first ever set between these two eventual legends of the game went down. Now, I'm not going to analyze every single set between Leo and his two demons, but I will be analyzing the first and most recent sets, so that we can compare and contrast between the two and see the evolution in these rivalries. Leo would drop into losers finals and beat Gluttony again to get a rematch with Shuton in Grands. Grand finals was much better for Leo in terms of keeping it even with Shuton, but he still wouldn't manage to take a game. He'd go Wolf in games 1 and 3, but game 2 saw MkLeo go a character that modern fans will be very surprised to see all the way back in 2019, Corrin. In one of his first uses of this character in bracket, Leo would actually take Shuton's first stock, though sadly to no avail. Leo would lose once again 3-0, taking a second place finish at this pre-local. Oh, and as for the actual Super Major itself that this tournament was in preparation for, Shuton would actually go on to win the entire thing as the 11th seed, while MkLeo would place a disappointing 7th as the 1 seed. But time kept marching on, and MkLeo would not play another set against either of his demons until summer of 2022. Real quick though, keep in mind everything that's gone down between those two sets. Leo went from one of the top contenders in the game to the top contender, dominating the entire scene with his iconic Joker, going through lockdowns, and then coming back in 2021 and dominating the scene again with his Byleth. And in all that time, despite being at the same tournament several times, Leo never got his run back versus Shuton, always managing to avoid him in his bracket path. In fact, our next set at Super Smash Con 2022 wouldn't even be against Shuton. Rather, this was the first time that MkLeo would come into contact with his second bracket demon, Onin. MkLeo was coming into Super Smash Con 2022 as the first seed, and yet again, would be relatively unchallenged going through most of his early bracket, getting through phase 1, 2, and 3 pools, while racking up wins over the likes of JW, Rivers, aka Shoyo James, and Fatality on the way in the top 32. But waiting for Leo here in winners round 1 of top 32 was a new face, Onin. Onin was still a very new name in the spotlight of the wider Smash audience. They had just won their first ever major about a month prior at Get On My Level 2022, beating Larry Lurr, Cola, Riddles, and Big D twice. But Gamel was a relatively smaller major compared to SmashCon, so there were still a lot of people in the Smash scene who had no idea who Onin even was. Despite this, Onin had also torn through the early phases of brackets, culminating in wins over Comet, Kobe, and Mudace, who was known as something of a Steve Slayer at that time. And so, the first ever meeting between MkLeo and Onin took place on the big stage at Super Smash Con 2022, with Leo piloting Byleth. Back during this time, people, including Leo, thought that Byleth did relatively well into Steve for basically the same reasons Sephiroth does well into him. A big disjoint helping with both breaking down walls at a safe distance and challenging minecarts. Of course, these days, needless to say that people's opinions have shifted on that matter, at least a little bit. It's also important to keep in mind that MkLeo's only high-level Steve practice at that point was fighting Quandale Dingle-Lingleton earlier that year at Collision 2022. So there's something to be said about how well Leo knew the Steve matchup with any character.
Steve! I actually don't have a lot of experience against Steve.
Regardless, Onin would be the one who took first blood, hitting a fair spike into an up smash after they called out Leo's air dodge, though MkLeo would quickly respond. In this first ever meeting, we can see that Leo had some trouble working around Byleth's slow speed against Onin's walls, trying to use neutral B to break the blocks, but to no avail, eventually losing his second stock to a diamond back air. Though when Leo was able to get in on Onin, he'd do pretty well, like what happened to even up the game in a last stock scenario. But ultimately, Steve's damage output, especially with Diamond, far outpaced Byleth's, with another fair spike up smash taking game 1. Realizing that he needed to stifle Steve's camping, Leo counterpicked to a smaller stage in the form of Hollow Bastion. But Onin had a phenomenal advantage state to open up the game, taking Leo's first stock with barely 30% on the board. The second stock saw Onin take full advantage of Leo's knowledge gap versus Steve, using Anvil to drop down onto a block that was already on stage. Leo tried to catch this with up B, but Steve was too low for this to work, so Onin was able to respond with Diamond F Smash. And even on a heavier character like Byleth, it was enough to take the stock at around 75% pre-hit. At this point, we see Leo try to slow the game down, even playing off stage. But he played too hard, as a dropped anvil results in an untechable situation, losing Leo game 2. Running it back in game 3, we can see Leo finally start to figure out and utilize Byleth's optimal tool for breaking blocks, his forward air. But once again taking advantage of the knowledge gap, Onin was able to set up a shield break situation on the ledge, which Leo fell victim to, resulting in both a lost stock and a taunt from the young Steve. Even when Leo tried to fight back with pressure, Onin was able to footstool anvil out of shield to take the stock, one of the earliest uses on a major stage of a technique that would eventually become second nature for every Steve and their mother. Leo was now down 3 stocks to 1, but unlike his earlier set with Shuton, Leo wouldn't be able to bring it back to even. Onin achieved their first win on MkLeo in 3-0 fashion, capped off with a dominant 3 stock. And in a lot of ways, this set is actually very similar to the earlier set with Shuton. Firstly, the character that Leo is going is different than the one he'd eventually be using in his most recent set against each player. Secondly, Leo's losses here actually have some commonalities. In both sets, Leo is facing off against a slow, methodical playstyle that he's struggling to approach. And even when he does, both characters are able to output tons of damage, Olimar through purple Pikmin and Steve through diamond tools. And in both situations, it's not really a character issue per se, though this point certainly applies more to Olimar, as MkLeo has, to this day, a 100% win record against Myron's Olimar, and is also undefeated against DeBuzz's Olimar, only ever dropping a set to his Min-Min. In regard to Steve, MkLeo is undefeated against Quandale Dingle-Lingleton's Steve, who he had fought at Collision that same year and later in this very bracket at Super Smash Con. And that's not even mentioning that Leo would later go on to win the Ludwig Smash Invitational over Akala in this very same matchup. While Steve has certainly become more of a problem for Leo in recent years, at the time of this set, this loss was the outlier. And even today, Leo basically only loses to the best Steves, like Akala, Syrup, and Onin themselves. Either way, in regard to this bracket, MkLeo would go on to make a big losers run, beating Anathema, Aaron, Quandale Dingle-Lingleton, and Cola before eventually losing to Gluttony to place 5th as the first seed. As for Onin, they'd go on to defeat Riddles, Gluttony, and Meister twice to win the entire thing as the 16th seed, a now historic win. I suppose that's also another similarity between these two sets, the fact that both players went on to win Super Majors after beating Leo, with Onin at Super Smash Con and Shuton at Prime Saga. Speaking of Shuton, Leo's next chance to go against the Japanese Olimar approached extremely quickly after his first encounter with Onin, taking place at the Scuffed World Tour later that same year in fall of 2022. MkLeo entered into Scuffed World Tour as the first seed, and won 2 sets in a row against Kazuya players, Ferps and Riddles, which included the legendary Marth counterpick that has now been cemented into the Smash Ultimate Hall of Fame. But after moving into winner's side top 8, Leo had lost 3-0 to Tweak and fell into loser's bracket, where Shuton was waiting for him. Shuton's bracket path had been almost entirely through losers. After winning his first set against Sonics 3-1, Shuton lost a close game 5 to Akala before proceeding to defeat DeBuzz and Gluttony to make it into losers quarterfinals to fight MkLeo. This set, just like the first 2 they had fought back in 2019, was a 3-0 sweep in Shuton's favor. Leo tried to go both Byleth and Marth into Shuton, utilizing big disjoints that Olimar is supposed to be weak towards, but to no avail, even though all 3 games did go to last stock. This loss would eliminate MkLeo at 5th place as the first seed, and as for Shuton, he'd go on to use his Aegis to win the run back versus Akala in a close game 5, before losing to his own bracket demon in Tweak 3-1 in losers finals to place 3rd as the 7th seed. Though interestingly, I want to bring our attention back towards Shuton's victory over Akala. You see, in their first set together, Shuton had tried the Olimar against Akala's Steve, which ultimately got pretty badly beaten, inspiring Shuton to go Aegis into Steve for the rest of the tournament. And not only would he end up winning the run back, he 3-stocked Akala in Game 5 of Losers Semifinals. And you've gotta imagine that Leo watched this set and may have gotten some ideas from it. Leo himself had been dabbling with Aegis in 2021, most notably of course using it to win the Smash World Tour, and using it as recently as Rise and Grind 2022, where Aegis was Leo's primary character to win that major. Knowing that his main, Byleth, was struggling more and more against Steve as the meta progressed, perhaps Leo watching this set here started to plant some seeds that we'll see sprout at a later date. The next time Leo would get a chance to fight his demons was 2024, and just like with 2022, things have changed a lot in Leo's career since he had last battled either player. First of all, it's important to note that at this point, people were really beginning to notice that Leo had these blind spots. And now his record against Shuton specifically was becoming a proper storyline. The other big thing is that Leo's character pool has once again shifted. Up to now, a big point of contention with Leo's record against Shuton specifically is that he had never gone Joker into him before. He's gone Wolf, Marth, Byleth, and even Corrin, but Shuton had never faced off against Leo's Joker. And for that matter, neither had Onin. Would that prove to be the key factor to figuring out these matchups once and for all? Well, Leo's next set against one of these players was actually online, the only Wi-Fi set in his records against either player. It's important to consider that Joker isn't typically seen as a Wi-Fi character, while Steve very much is. Leo had been coming into the tournament as the 5th seed, sweeping his way to top 64 before losing in an upset to Elijahman Shulk to drop into losers, winning just 2 more sets before having to go up against Onin, who had also torn their way into top 64, before being upset by TM7 Zap's Bowser Jr. and dropping into losers to fight MkLeo. Leo kept it extremely close in this short best-of-3 set, except for the last stocks, where Leo was put in bad situations against Steve's block edge guards, during a time in Smash where nobody really knew how to get around that. This 0-2 loss resulted in MkLeo placing 17th as the 5th seed, and as for Onin, they'd go on to make a big losers run, only losing to Shiny Mark in losers finals to place 3rd as the number 6 seed. Later that same season, spring of 2024, MkLeo would take a trip to Japan for several tournaments, but the one of interest for our story is Delta 8, where Leo was coming in as the 11th seed. Starting off the weekend, Leo would make his way to top 64 successfully with wins over Mado and Paisetiman, among others, before 3-0ing Ryuo in order to face off against Shuton, who had wins over Ryope, Naocha, and Kuhaku up to that point. This set was the first time that MkLeo was facing off against Shuton with his Joker, but also the only time in their set history where they were fighting on Shuton's home turf, with Leo now being the one who needed to deal with jet lag and other complications that come with traveling across oceans. This set is notable in the fact that it is, by far, the closest set that these two have had up to this point, and Leo still wasn't able to take a game. Shuton clutched out last hit scenarios and made good comebacks in order to win the set 3-0. And from here, Leo dropped into losers and won 2 more sets over Maipan and Rabikusu before losing to Japanese hero Akakikusu for 9th place as the 11th seed. While Shuton, on the other hand, would defeat Hurt and Snow, only losing a close game 5 to Mia and a 3-0 to Akala to place 3rd as the number 6 seed. Huh, that's the exact same seeding and final placement of Onin at the coin box. Interesting. The next year, spring 2025, saw MkLeo not get another chance to face off against Shuton, but rather a whopping 3 whole sets against his other bracket demon, Onin, 2 of which took place at Level Up Expo 2025. MkLeo was entering Level Up Expo as the 16th seed, quickly farming his pool's opponents on the way into top 128, where he defeated Captain Krupp 3-0. Onin, on the other hand, was entering as the 17th seed, and they also swept their pool's opponents to make top 128, where they defeated Atada in a close game 5 to make it to MkLeo. Now, unfortunately, of all the sets that we're covering in today's video, this is the only one that we don't have a VOD for, but snippets of it were captured off of a handcam stream that has only been preserved through watch parties. Though this set is very notable in that this was the first time that MkLeo took a game off of either of his demons, winning game 2 against Onin. Though sadly, that game was the only one that Leo would take, as Onin would win the set in 3-1 fashion, casting Leo down into the losers bracket. The two of them would meet later on in top 8, but the path they took to get there was very different. MkLeo would tear through losers, winning 5 sets in a row, defeating Apollo Kage, Skinny the Pooh, who had just eliminated Akala from the tournament, Gluttony in a game 5, Louis Money, and Rauru to make losers side top 8. Onin, by contrast, would benefit from Kurama's upset over Akala the round prior, Onin defeated Kurama to make winner's side top 24, where they would lose to Zamba, before defeating Wrath in a close game 5 set in order to make it into losers 8ths to face off against Leo once more. In this set, Leo would start off playing hot, once again taking a game to open up the set, the second ever game taken over either one of his bracket demons. However, Onin would quickly get their act together, winning the next 3 games in a row, with 2 of them being comfortable, multi-stock leads. This loss would eliminate MkLeo at 7th place as the 16th seed, and Onin would then proceed to go on an absolute rampage, beating Kiarash, Light, and Zamba in the runback, only losing to Doromigi in a dominant grand finals to place 2nd as the 17th seed. But it wouldn't be long before MkLeo would get another shot at Onin. It was at Kulon 16, which took place right after Kaguribi 13's absolute craziness. And it was here that we'd see the final evolution in MkLeo's game plan against Steve. You see, Leo had gone back to the drawing board, and even though most of 2024 was spent narrowing down his character lineup, he'd decided to bring out an old face to tackle his new, ever-growing Steve problem. Leo would bring out the Aegis. MkLeo was coming into Kulon 16 as the 8th seed and made it through pools easily to make top 96, where he defeated Beastly before fighting Onin, who was entering as the 9th seed and who also cleaned house in pools before defeating Kurofone 3-0 to face off against MkLeo. This set, like I mentioned earlier, would see MkLeo go Aegis into Onin's Steve. Aegis does verifiably better than Joker into the Steve matchup, but why is that exactly? Well, like we've seen in Shuton vs Akala, Aegis' speed allows her to get in on Steve much easier and run him down to prevent walls from even being built in the first place, much like other fast characters like Fox can sometimes accomplish. Additionally, once you do get in, Aegis' frame trapping and juggling, combined with her high mobility, allows her to keep Steve in disadvantage for longer. Not to mention, the longer range of Aegis allows you to more easily challenge minecarts, and Steve's own aerials with your superior range. We can see this game plan demonstrated well in Game 1, where Leo's main goal is to stay underneath Onin when possible and keep them in disadvantage. And Leo plays Pyra almost like Cloud, utilizing a frame trap scenario of falling up air into up tilt to checkmate Onin. And Leo carries that game plan well into a Game 1 victory. Sadly though, much like his set at Level Up Expo, this Game 1 was the only game Leo would end up taking, as Onin would take the next 3 in a row. But if Leo had a much better character for the matchup and a solid game plan, why did he lose? Well, the answer varied game to game, but it all boils down to Onin doing a good job at exploiting Aegis' usual volatility, that being her vulnerable recovery and her struggles to sometimes pressure shields. If Leo wanted to defeat Onin with Aegis, he'd need one thing: polish. His game plan and character choice were solid, as was his advantage state, but the fragility of Aegis as a character was just being exploited too often. As for Kulon 16, Leo would go on to win only one more set against Kananabe before losing to Rocky's Kazuya and Steve to place 13th as the 8th seed, while Onin would once again go on an explosive run, defeating Mia, Tweak, Gluttony, and Sonics to win this Japanese super major as the 9th seed. It's important to note that, at this point, much like Shuton before, Onin's impressive set record over MkLeo was starting to turn heads, and people were realizing that they were a big roadblock in any bracket Leo attended. In fact, with the double victories at Level Up Expo, Onin now had more wins over Leo than Shuton did, with Onin at 5 and Shuton at 4. But, of course, this is the Smash community. When Shuton does it, it's a player versus player thing, and Shuton has downloaded Ultimate's GOAT. But when Onin does it, and even does it more than Shuton, does Onin as a player get any credit whatsoever? Of course not. At best, it ends in toxicity. At worst, Steve hate is used as a thin veil for bigotry, the favorite pastime of only the most pathetic of individuals. These two have accomplished something tremendous up to that point: a 100% win rate against an individual considered to be the best to ever play this game. Which brings us to our last 2 encounters with MkLeo's bracket demons, as well as to the present day, July of 2025. It's the beginning of the month, on July 4th, and Get On My Level Forever is happening in Toronto, Canada, where MkLeo is entering into Ultimate Singles as the 9th seed, and both Onin and Shuton are in attendance. But despite being a high seed, Leo's weekend could not have gotten off to a rockier start, as after sweeping his pool flawlessly, Leo would lose his first set in top 128 to Zog, better known to some of you as Big Duck Hunt Fan 7000. Dropping into losers incredibly early, Leo was forced to go on a tear through losers bracket, which included a Game 5 clutch win over Vendetta and benefiting from Muteace's DQ in order to face off against Shuton, who was entering as the 3rd seed and got a good win over Jackal before losing 3-0 to Cola to drop into losers against Leo. Game 1 started off fierce, with intense scrapping bringing both combatants to over 100%, where Leo then found a key spike off stage to take first blood and even racking up a decent amount of extra credit before losing his own first stock. In this second stock, we'd really start to see the key difference that was the turning point for Leo: his ledge game. Shuton was kept off stage for long periods of time, continuously sent off stage with lightning fast back airs, though he was always quick to even the game back up. It looked as though we might be headed into a long last stock scenario until Leo found fair 1 into up smash out of nowhere to take game 1. Running it back to PS2, Leo would once again utilize Rebel's guard to take advantage of Pikmin that Shuton would stick onto him. But it was Shuton who would find an amazing early game lead by an entire stock. But at only 55%, Leo found a dare to get Shuton onto the platform before proceeding to do up throw up air like he's playing Inkling to steal away Shuton's stock and get back in control of this game. And lest you think that Leo needed Arsene to take stocks, he finds a critical drag down smash to take Shuton's second stock, no Arsene necessary. Shuton, despite having some percent on him by this point, was able to even up the stock count. And for a moment, it looked as if Shuton would take the game, getting Leo deep off stage with a purple Pikmin forward air. But a skillful recovery allowed Leo to get back on the stage and reverse his fortunes, catching Shuton with Egeon in order to take game 2. The third game saw Shuton take the lead once again, much like in the previous game, though the lead wasn't anywhere near as large. Despite an impressive jab train across the stage, Shuton missed his finisher, allowing Leo to find an opening to even up the stock count. And with no Arsene, Leo relied on his pure combo finesse to earn him the stock, finding a fair 1 drag down F smash at just the right time. And Leo would have lost his stock right afterward if not for Rebel's guard absorbing a purple Pikmin toss, a situation that had lost Leo so many stocks back in 2019, though Shuton did eventually even it up. Up by nearly 100%, Leo found a fair 1, which he converted into down tilt. Seems like a missed opportunity until he's put into the exact same scenario moments later, and this time, Leo picks up smash, taking the game and the set in 3-0 fashion over one of his biggest demons. So why was MkLeo able to win this set? It's important to remember that their last set at Delta 8, while being a 3-0, was still very close. It's just that this time, Leo was the one closing out the last stock scenarios and making the comebacks, not Shuton. But that begs the question, why? What adaptations did he make? If you ask me, I think the biggest difference in this set versus his others is his confidence. And not strictly metaphorical confidence either. His fair 1 drag downs, his Rebel's guards, his off-stage game that we saw in game 1, Leo was more willing to go for big options, and critically, they landed true. I also do think character plays a big part in his confidence boost. There's no secret that Leo truly feels himself with Joker more than any other character. For lack of a better term, he starts schmoovin'. This 3-0 sweep would eliminate Shuton at 13th place as the 3rd seed, and now it was finally Leo's turn to go on a big run after winning a critical set. After this win, he defeated Wilds 3-0 to make top 8, and then clutched a Game 5 banger set over Hurt, as well as using his Aegis to defeat Cola in a close Game 5, a player who had been giving him trouble recently at tournaments like Collision 2024 and the second Luminosity Invitational. Leo's run would only be stopped by Spargo, the eventual winner, going on what may be the best losers run of modern Smash Ultimate, with Leo placing 4th as the 9th seed, not only beating one of his demons, but actually outplacing the other, as Onin would get 5th. Speaking of Onin, there's only one more set left to talk about in this video, and only one more bracket roadblock it could be against. Fast forward to the end of July, the 26th, and we're down in Mexico, MkLeo's home turf, for S Factor 12, where MkLeo was entering as the 8th seed. At first, Leo would go undefeated, getting good wins over Nexus and Haunter's Steve on the way. Then, in round 2 of top 64, Leo would lose to Syrup Steve, dropping into losers and defeating Mo and Hurt to make it to Onin, who, by contrast, had been tearing it up in winners. They had made it to winner's quarters with no games dropped, getting double Falcon wins in Fatality and Andrik, as well as benefiting from Gyelhue upsetting Gluttony, as Onin would win that set 3-0 as well. However, at this point, Onin would lose 3-1 to famed Steve Killer Spargo in winner's quarters, and immediately afterward was put back on stream to face off against MkLeo. And if that wasn't enough, Spargo also took the time to coach Leo headed into the set. In short, what I'm saying is that Leo could not have asked for better circumstances headed into this top 8 qualifier. Game 1, much like the Shuton set earlier, started with both players scrapping fiercely, until Leo found a good down air spike, connecting it into an up B in order to take the first blood, though the game was evened up quickly. But Leo was playing hot this set, and found an early low percent combo with Mithra that turned into a Pyra juggle situation. And whether it be a DI issue or an issue of PS2's low ceiling, Leo managed to get the kill at only 70% with Pyra's powerful up air, though the stock count was evened up due to an anvil catching Leo at the wrong place, wrong time. At around 100%, Leo finds a dash attack to send Onin deep off stage, chasing with a fair that beats out Minecart to take game 1 for Leo. Game 2 saw Onin chase Leo off stage and try to set up a block edgeguard that had won them their previous set. But Leo, with the early up B, caught Onin before they could finish the setup, saving his own life while putting Onin in a poor position. Though unfortunately, as Pyra, that same early up B put Leo right in the position to be caught by Magma Block, though the game was evened up extremely quickly yet again. With Diamond in hand, Onin did a good job at keeping Leo off stage, and eventually found an early stock with a clean fair spike. And another Diamond combo would put Onin in a lead that they'd ride all the way to a Game 2 victory. Game 3 saw Leo correctly avoid one of the options that had formerly sealed his fate, Anvil out of shield, being able to properly dodge it, and through doing so, set up a down tilt up air kill confirm to take the first stock of the game. We even see Leo attempt his own footstool out of shield shenanigans, though ultimately it's the classic down air up smash that takes the second stock instead. We can even see Leo, while he's on Mithra, avoid overextending with unsafe options, instead waiting for Onin to either approach him or start camping, so that Leo can head back in. When they decide to try and camp, Leo rushes back in and puts Onin in a Pyra juggle situation, which ultimately ends with dash attack sealing the game in Leo's favor. Much like the end of Game 3, Game 4 saw Leo use Pyra's frame trapping to endlessly keep Onin in disadvantage, only to eventually catch their recovery with a dare spike to open up the game. Once things get back into an even standing, we see Leo once again avoid unsafe overextensions by instead going for lots of grabs, throwing Onin upwards and trying to set up for even more juggle situations, an extremely smart adaptation from their prior sets together, only to catch Onin actually overextending with a back air, using another down tilt up air confirm to bring Onin to last stock, though the game was evened up quickly through the trusty Anvil out of shield. Now, it's Game 4, last stock, and MkLeo has the entire crowd behind him. Everyone watching, in the venue and at home, wants to see history be made. And there's nothing MkLeo is better at than making history.
Good call here. Make it down there. Make it the up smash. Whatever it is, but whatever hits here is gonna seal the deal and take it to the top 8 upper, and that's it.
That's it.
And that's
Leo
it.
wins.
He does
Leo
it.
wins. The GOAT does it.
Top
The
8.
GOAT does it. GOAT means GOAT.
He's
And his
there.
ass is going to top 8.
Call it. Call it. Call
Let's
it.
go.
You called it.
Let's
and that's
go.
it. And that's it. He makes it
Hey-yo.
into the top 8. The
Let's go.
GOAT makes it in the home turf. He
Ah.
is in his house.
It's amazing.
The energy.
It's
Everyone.
amazing.
Like a Genki Dama. Making sure.
And so, MkLeo, within the span of a single month, finally defeated both of his bracket demons, Shuton and Onin. So now, only 2 questions remain. How will his sets with these players go from now on, and who's next? Who else has Leo not beaten yet? Let's begin with the first matter. Personally, I think Leo has changed all he needed to in order to finally start taking sets off of Shuton. With the renewed confidence in his Joker, their sets have gone from sweeps in 2019 to close call bangers in 2025. If I had to guess, even though Leo could theoretically go some different characters, with Rob in particular having a great matchup into Olimar, I think Leo's Shuton sets will be Joker Olimar for the rest of this game's life. And I foresee the 2 of them going back and forth, just depending on who's playing better that day, and who can therefore close out last hits and make good comebacks. As for Onin, the swap to Aegis was the difference maker in turning their sets together into close races. But I actually think there is potential to see a different character here. MkLeo adapted wonderfully in not overextending, recovering smartly, and keeping Steve in disadvantage. But if this meta keeps developing, I imagine Aegis will struggle more and more as time goes on, much like how the Aegis-Sonic matchup has evolved. If that happens, I actually think Leo's Rob would not be a terrible pick. He's recently used that character against the likes of Sonic and Pikachu, where Aegis and Joker both struggle, and so the list of characters that Leo's going Aegis for whittles down more and more. It may be smarter to focus all of his secondary energy into Rob instead of splitting it between him and Aegis. When I think about it, there's not a current matchup Leo goes Aegis in that Rob can't handle just as well, if not better. Though all of this is still up in the air. Leo's been developing this matchup at the highest level, and it's paid off well so far. So all of this Rob talk is really only if things start swinging back in the other direction again. Which I think is actually pretty likely with Onin specifically, given the unfavorable conditions for them in that S-Factor set. But beyond that, now that Leo has overcome the two players who were by far his biggest bracket demons, who's left? Is there anyone else Leo has never beaten? Well, yes, of course there is. Everyone has a player they've never beaten, because nearly every player has a matchup they've only ever played once, only to never see that player again. Leo's no different. There are a lot of matchups where Leo's lost their only encounter, but given another chance, he could easily win today. That being said, there are only 5 players in the world who have played Leo more than once who have never lost to him. Those players are Kameme, Yez, Supasemi, Neo, and Syrup. How likely is it that Leo is going to beat these players and even up his set record against them? Well, starting off with the least likely, Kameme and Yez basically don't play this game anymore. And while I have absolutely no doubt that Leo could beat them if they played again, I just don't think they're going to get the chance to for Ultimate's remaining lifespan. Supasemi and Neo are in a similar boat in the sense that I believe, if they fought right now, Leo could beat both of them. In fact, Leo was inches away from beating Supasemi the last time they fought at Cafeteria Cup. And if not for an incredible 3-1 stock comeback, Supasemi wouldn't even be on this list. Neo, on the other hand, is still actively competing, but it's undeniable that he's in a bit of a slump right now, while Leo's career has been on the rise. So if the two of them fought again, I think it's pretty likely Leo would take it. Both of these players regularly compete in Europe. So the next time Leo heads over there for a major or something, he could be getting his first wins on both of these players. And lastly, there's Syrup, the player who, I believe, has the best chances to become Leo's next big bracket demon. Syrup's career has been on an exponential rise, and he was actually the one who sent Leo to losers at S-Factor 12, where he'd eventually go on to beat Onin. To me, that says that Leo might have more trouble beating Syrup's Steve with his Aegis. This is actually where my ideas about Rob might come into play. But thinking about it, Syrup is in the same region as Zamba, so maybe just trying to use Aegis is the play here. Could Leo beat Syrup the next time they fight? Maybe, but I think Leo will have to be playing hot, and Syrup will have to, not be doing that. I guess we'll just have to wait and see, but for now, I'm excited to see if Syrup will live up to his potential and blossom into MkLeo's next bracket demon. And if he does, it's just a matter of time before the GOAT does what he does best: make history. That's going to be it for today's video. Before I go, shout out to my patrons Ocean Man, Logan S, Persipalm, Wawa, Mr. Sinister, Mistybot, Diamond Blaze, and my tutu patron Ben L. Additionally, shout out my YouTube members DTR Jr., Kirby Fan, Nexus, and Loco Soco. Lastly, extra special thanks to my tier 3 supporters Avadoon, who says Mr. Rise is the Go to Smash content, and Iltis, who says MkLeo always comes back. If you want to support me using any of these methods, links in the description down below. Don't miss my next upload, but until then, I've been Mr. Mice, and thank you all so very much for watching.